Wounded and pursued, a former Navy SEAL makes a decision that nearly costs him everything. He leaves his German Shepherd by the roadside, promising to return. A few miles away, a woman with nothing left hears a faint moan in the cold and decides to stop when others don't. What happens next will bind three shattered lives together and prove that sometimes survival isn't determined by strength, but by the courage to care. Before we begin, let me know where you're watching from. Subscribe for more. Snow fell steadily across the northern forest, thick and quiet, muting the world into a pale, breathless stillness where distance vanished and sound felt swallowed by cold. Jack Turner drove with both hands steady on the steering wheel, his knuckles pale against the dark leather, eyes fixed on the narrow road ahead as the headlights carved a fragile tunnel through the falling snow. He wore an old Navy SEAL K9 jacket, olive green faded to gray at the seams, the fabric stiff from years of use. At 41, Jack was tall and broad-shouldered, his posture still rigid with military discipline, though the right side of his jaw carried a thin scar that tightened when he clenched his teeth. A short, untrimmed beard shadowed his face, and his eyes, steel blue and perpetually alert, held the weight of someone who had learned too early that survival often meant making impossible choices. On the passenger seat, curled tightly on a folded thermal blanket, lay Rex. The German Shepherd puppy was barely 6 months old, all oversized paws and a soft black and tan fur, his ears still unsure whether to stand or flop as he slept. His ribs rose and fell in small, uneven breaths, and every few minutes his tail twitched as if chasing something in a dream. Rex was not trained, not yet shaped by commands or discipline. He was the last living thread connecting Jack to a fallen teammate, his K9 partner, killed 8 months earlier during a mission that Jack replayed every night in silence. Rex had been born weeks after that mission, and Jack had promised over a grave marked by frozen soil that the dog would be protected, raised somewhere safe, away from the violence that had already taken too much. The plan was simple. Drive Rex to a remote training ranch 2 hours north, a place run by retired handlers who knew how to raise working dogs without breaking their spirits. Jack would hand the puppy over, sign the paperwork, and walk away before attachment turned into weakness. He told himself that was the responsible thing to do. Yet his chest felt tight every time he glanced at the small body beside him, the faint warmth radiating through the blanket, trusting him completely. The forest thickened as the road narrowed, snow piling faster now, driven sideways by wind. Jack's instincts prickled, the way they had on patrols when nothing looked wrong but everything felt off. He checked the rearview mirror. Headlights. Far back, faint, but there. He slowed slightly. The lights slowed too. His jaw tightened. People from his past had a way of resurfacing when he least expected it. Unfinished business, loose ends from missions that were never meant to exist on record. Jack adjusted his grip on the wheel, pulse steady but heavy, mind calculating distances, options, exits. The first shot of pain came suddenly as the car hit a patch of ice. The tires slid, metal groaned, and the vehicle lurched sideways before slamming hard into a buried embankment. The world jolted. Jack's head snapped forward, then back. His leg struck the dashboard with a dull, sickening impact. He tasted blood. The engine sputtered, then died, leaving only the wind and the soft whimper that came from the passenger seat. "It's okay," Jack muttered automatically, though he wasn't sure who he was trying to reassure. He tested his right leg and felt sharp pain bloom from knee to hip. Not broken, but bad enough. He forced the door open and stepped into the snow, boots sinking instantly. The headlights still glowed weakly, illuminating the forest edge. In the distance, the other lights were closer now. Too close. Jack moved fast despite the pain, opening the passenger door and lifting Rex into his arms. The puppy licked his chin once, confused but calm, trusting. That trust hit harder than the injury. Jack scanned the area and spotted a shallow hollow near a fallen pine, the branches thick enough to break the wind. He laid the blanket down, wrapped Rex carefully, then pulled off his own insulated liner and added it over the puppy's small body. "Listen to me," Jack said quietly, voice low and controlled, the tone he used only when he meant every word. He knelt despite the pain, meeting Rex's dark eyes. "You stay here. Lie down. Don't move." Rex tilted his head, ears half raised, tail thumping once against the snow. Jack pressed his forehead briefly to the puppy's. "I'll come back, I promise." It was the same promise he had made before, the same one he had learned never to give lightly. The wind howled louder as Jack forced himself upright. He took a few deliberate steps away from the hollow, then more, angling toward the deeper trees to draw attention. Each movement sent fire through his leg, but he didn't slow. In the mirror of the abandoned car, headlights swept closer, searching. Jack disappeared into the forest, leaving behind the one thing he wanted to protect most. He told himself it would only be minutes. He had survived worse. He always had. What Jack didn't account for was the storm. Snow thickened into a blinding curtain, erasing tracks almost as quickly as they were made. The temperature dropped sharply, biting through fabric, through resolve. Somewhere behind him, Rex let out a soft, questioning sound that was swallowed by the wind. Jack's chest tightened painfully, but he didn't turn back. Turning back now would mean everything: himself, the dog, the promise, ending in the same place. Survival demanded distance, even when every instinct screamed otherwise. As Jack pushed deeper into the trees, his thoughts fractured between the present and memories he couldn't fully silence. The sound of a radio cutting out, the weight of a dying dog in his arms, the look on a handler's face when words stopped working. He had learned to compartmentalize, to lock pain away and keep moving. That skill had kept him alive. Tonight, it felt like a curse. Behind him, unseen, the small hollow near the fallen pine grew quieter, snow layering over blanket and liner alike. Rex curled tighter, breath fogging the fabric, ears flattening against the cold. He did not understand abandonment. He only knew the last voice he had heard had told him to stay. And so he stayed, alone in the white, waiting for a promise to return through the storm. The storm did not end when the road went quiet. It only spread wider, pressing into the spaces where people were supposed to be. Snow swept sideways beneath the weak glow of distant lights, blurring the line between town and forest, between shelter and exposure. Somewhere along that forgotten stretch of highway, another figure moved through the night, not chasing, not fleeing, just trying to last until morning. Emily Carter walked with her head down, boots scraping over packed snow that hid slick ice beneath. Her steps were measured and small, shoulders slightly hunched, not from fear but from habit. The posture of someone who had learned that taking up less space sometimes meant surviving longer. She was 29, though hardship had etched a quiet weariness into her face that made strangers guess older. Slim to the point of fragility, slightly underweight, with narrow shoulders wrapped in a borrowed dark coat, frayed at the cuffs, she carried herself with the guarded awareness of someone used to being overlooked. Her brown hair was pulled back beneath a thin knit hat, loose strands escaping to freeze against skin already raw from the cold. She didn't hurry, but she didn't stop either. Stopping had never helped her before. Earlier that day, she had been fired from the last place willing to pay her in cash. The manager's apology had come quickly and without eye contact, followed by a reminder that she needed to clear out before evening. By nightfall, the place she had been sleeping, never permanent, never promised, was no longer an option. The shelter she sometimes relied on was already full. No explanations were demanded. No anger was wasted. The world had simply closed another door, as it had done many times before. So Emily did what she always did when there was nowhere left to go. She kept moving. She aimed for the convenience store off the highway, the one that stayed open late, where warmth and fluorescent light offered at least the illusion of safety for a few hours. She told herself she only needed to make it through the night. Morning always changed things, even if only slightly. She was nearly past the small pine grove near the edge of the store's parking lot when something brushed against her awareness. At first, she dismissed it. The wind made strange sounds when it threaded through trees, bending branches until they groaned, rattling loose signs like hollow bones. But this was different, softer, not urgent, just wrong. Emily slowed, then stopped entirely, breath fogging in short bursts. Her instincts spoke immediately, sharp and practiced. Keep walking, don't get involved. The cold doesn't care about good intentions. Those instincts had kept her alive. But another part of her, quieter and harder to silence, turned her toward the trees. She followed the sound with cautious steps, snow crunching beneath her boots, heart tightening as the storm erased her footprints almost as soon as she made them. That was when she saw him. A small German shepherd puppy lay curled into a shallow hollow at the base of a pine tree, the thick trunk and low branches shielding him from the worst of the wind. His fur was black and tan, dusted white, his body trembling in short, uneven shivers that told Emily everything she needed to know. He was too still, too quiet. His ears, still soft with youth, barely twitched as she knelt. She didn't need training to recognize hypothermia. She had felt its edge creep into her own bones on nights she barely remembered surviving. When the puppy lifted his head just enough to meet her eyes, dark, unfocused, but alive, whatever resistance she had left quietly gave way. Emily hesitated only a moment. She pulled off her thin gloves, fingers burning instantly, and unwound the scarf from her neck. It was small, gray, worn thin in places, but it was the only thing she owned that still felt personal. It had kept her alive more than once. She wrapped it carefully around the puppy's chest and belly, tucking it close, then shifted her body nearer, turning her back to the wind and using herself as a shield. The cold bit harder now, stealing heat fast, but she didn't pull away. She pressed the puppy gently against her, murmuring softly, words without meaning, just sound meant to soothe. She wasn't sure whether she was trying to calm him or herself. The neon glow of the convenience store flickered through the storm a short distance away, close enough to promise warmth, far enough to feel unreachable. Emily measured the distance, the puppy's weight, the weakness already creeping into her legs. Carrying him might kill them both. Leaving him would certainly kill him. She stayed. She counted breaths. She rubbed his sides to keep circulation moving. She watched the rise and fall of his chest as if it were the only thing anchoring her to the night. Time stretched into something strange and elastic. Emily's thoughts drifted as her body fought the cold. She remembered other nights, Doorways, bus stations, basements that smelled of damp concrete. Places where survival depended more on endurance than hope. She had learned long ago not to expect rescue. Expectation only sharpened disappointment. Still, as the minutes passed, she found herself listening for sounds beyond the storm. An engine, footsteps, anything at all. The puppy let out a small sound then, barely audible, a questioning whimper swallowed almost immediately by the wind. Emily pressed her forehead gently to his, eyes burning. "Just stay," she whispered. "Just stay with me." Her teeth chattered uncontrollably now, muscles stiffening, fatigue pulling at her like a tide. She recognized the signs. She knew how close the edge was. Somewhere nearby, lights shifted. Headlights, perhaps, sweeping briefly through the snow before vanishing again. Or maybe it was nothing. The storm played tricks on the senses. Emily leaned back against the rough bark of the pine, keeping her body curved around the puppy, sheltering him as best she could. She thought of how strange it was that this small, shivering life felt heavier and more meaningful than anything she had carried in years. She had spent so long believing she was disposable that the world wouldn't notice if she disappeared. Yet here she was, choosing to stay, choosing to give warmth she could barely spare. Her strength faded gradually, not in panic, but in quiet acceptance. She shifted her weight carefully and let her head rest against the tree. If help came, it would come now. If it didn't, she had at least chosen how this night would end. Snow continued to fall, relentless and indifferent, covering footprints almost as soon as they formed. Emily's eyes closed despite her effort to keep them open, breath shallow but steady, body still curved protectively around the small life in her arms as the storm swallowed sound, light, and time itself. Jack Turner did not return because the storm softened or because fate decided to be kind. He returned because every step away from that hollow in the snow felt like tearing something vital out of his chest. And survival without keeping his promise had suddenly seemed like a hollow victory he could not live with. He moved through the forest slowly, deliberately, pain flaring up his injured leg with each step, but his focus was sharp, narrowed to one purpose. The snow had begun to fill his tracks, yet not fast enough to erase them completely. Jack followed the faint depressions he himself had made earlier, reading the ground the way he once read terrain in hostile valleys overseas. His breath came heavy, controlled, each exhale a white cloud that vanished almost instantly. He had learned long ago that panic wasted energy, and energy was life. Still, beneath the discipline, fear gnawed at him. Not fear for himself, but for the small, silent weight he had left behind. When the lights of the roadside convenience store finally emerged through the storm, Jack's heart lurched painfully. The building was squat and unremarkable, yellow signage flickering weakly, a beacon of warmth in a world stripped of mercy. He scanned the area automatically, habit dictating his movements, eyes checking windows, doors, shadows. Then he saw her. Emily sat on the ground near the side wall, her back pressed against the brick, as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Snow clung to her hat and shoulders, and her face was pale, lips tinged faintly blue, but her arms were locked tight around Rex, who was wrapped in a gray wool scarf and pressed close to her chest. The puppy's head was tucked beneath her chin, his breathing shallow but steady, his small body rising and falling against her like a fragile metronome. The sight hit Jack with such force that for a moment he forgot the pain in his leg entirely. He crossed the distance in long strides, dropping to one knee in front of her. "Emily," he said, though he did not yet know her name, the word coming out as a grounding sound more than a question. Her eyes lifted slowly, unfocused at first, then sharpening as she took him in. She looked wary, but not afraid, as if fear required more energy than she had left. "He was freezing," she said simply, voice hoarse but steady. "I couldn't leave him." Jack nodded once, jaw tight, the movement carrying more gratitude than he could articulate. He slid an arm beneath Rex carefully, feeling the warmth the scarf and Emily's body had preserved, and only then did he let himself exhale. "You did exactly right," he said. "You saved his life." Inside the store, the heat felt almost violent after the cold, rushing over skin and muscle with painful intensity. The clerk behind the counter, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and tired eyes named Harold, whose movements were slow from arthritis rather than age, watched them with quiet concern but asked no questions. Jack set Rex gently on a folded jacket near the heater, adjusting the scarf and rubbing warmth back into the puppy's paws with practiced hands. His touch was precise, confident, born of years working with dogs under pressure. Emily watched silently, something like awe flickering behind her exhaustion. Jack made the call to the nearest emergency veterinary clinic, his voice calm and clipped as he explained the situation, injury and all. He gave his name without hesitation this time. There was no one left to hide from. When he ended the call, he finally turned his attention fully to Emily. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, he could see how thin she was, how her jacket hung loosely from narrow shoulders, how her hands shook now that the immediate danger had passed. "My name's Jack," he said, lowering himself onto the bench beside her despite the pain. "That dog, he's mine." Emily nodded slowly, absorbing that. "I thought someone had cared," she said, "the way he was left. It didn't feel careless." Jack's throat tightened. "It wasn't," he replied. "It was the hardest choice I've ever made." Emily studied him then, really looked at him. The rigid posture, the controlled movements that never fully relaxed, the scar at his jaw, the fatigue etched deep around his eyes. She recognized that look, the look of someone shaped by loss rather than comfort. "I'm Emily," she said quietly. "I was just trying to get warm." Jack gave a small, almost apologetic nod. "So was he said, glancing at Rex. The drive to the clinic passed in near silence, broken only by the soft hum of the heater and the faint whimper Rex let out once before settling again. Jack drove one-handed, favoring his injured leg, while Emily sat in the passenger seat, arms wrapped around herself now that the scarf was gone. She felt strangely exposed without it, colder in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. When they arrived, the vet on call, a woman named Dr. Sarah Collins, met them at the door. Sarah was in her late 40s, tall and lean, with silver threaded through her dark hair, which she wore pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her face was lined not with age, but with empathy, the kind earned through years of tending to animals brought in by people at their breaking point. She moved with calm efficiency, voice gentle but firm as she examined Rex, checking temperature, heart rate, reflexes. "You caught it early," she said after a moment, looking between Jack and Emily. "That scarf made all the difference." Rex was settled under warming lamps, IV fluid started, prognosis good. Relief washed through Jack so hard it left him lightheaded. Emily sank into a chair in the waiting area, exhaustion finally winning. Jack returned a few minutes later, lowering himself beside her. "He'll be okay," he said quietly. Emily closed her eyes, a small, shaky smile touching her lips. "Good," she whispered. "That's good." They sat there together, two strangers bound by a moment neither had planned, the storm raging outside, while something quieter settled between them. Jack broke the silence first. "You didn't have to stop," he said. Emily opened her eyes and looked at him, her gaze steady despite the fatigue. "Neither did you," she replied. The truth of that hung between them, heavy and undeniable. As dawn edged faintly against the dark windows, Jack realized something else with unsettling clarity. Rex had survived not because Jack was strong or skilled, but because someone else had been willing to stand still in the cold and give what little warmth she had left. That understanding shifted something deep inside him, something rigid, loosening at last. Morning came thin and colorless, a pale light leaking through the clinic windows as Jack Turner signed the last of the discharge papers with a hand that still trembled from pain and fatigue, his injured leg stiff beneath him, his posture held together by habit, more than comfort, while Rex slept in a carrier at his feet, bandaged along one shoulder, breath steady and warm now, the black and tan fur dulled by antiseptic, but unmistakably alive. Jack's face looked older in daylight, the hard angles of his cheekbones more pronounced, beard rough and uneven from days without care, blue eyes alert in the way they had learned to be after too many nights where stillness meant danger. Emily stood a few steps behind him, shoulders hunched inside a borrowed jacket doctor. Sarah Collins had pressed into her hands before dawn, the fabric too large, sleeves covering her fingers, but her posture carried a quiet resolve that had not been there the night before. She looked smaller in the morning light, hair tucked back loosely, pale skin marked by exhaustion. Yet there was a steadiness in the way her eyes tracked Rex, as if some fragile thread now ran from her to the dog, anchoring her in a world that had spent years trying to push her loose. They left the clinic together because there was no reason not to, because separation would have felt like cowardice after what they had already shared, and because neither knew where else to go. Jack drove carefully, avoiding the highway, choosing back roads that wound through low hills and frozen fields, the kind of terrain he trusted more than open stretches, the kind where he could see trouble coming before it reached him. Emily noticed the way his gaze flicked to mirrors, the way his shoulders tensed at unfamiliar vehicles, the subtle vigilance that never fully relaxed, and she did not ask about it, sensing that whatever shaped that watchfulness had cost him dearly. Rex stirred as the car warmed, letting out a small sound that was half sigh, half question, and Jack reached down without looking, fingers brushing the carrier in reassurance, a gesture practiced enough to suggest habit, not impulse. "We'll take him somewhere quiet," Jack said at last, voice low, almost apologetic. "Just for today." Emily nodded. Quiet sounded like a gift. They stopped at a small rental cabin on the edge of a state forest, a place Jack kept under a name that wasn't fully his anymore, a remnant of a life lived between deployments, chosen for its isolation and for the way the trees closed in around it like protection rather than threat. The cabin was modest, weathered wood darkened by years of snow and rain, smoke rising thinly from a chimney that still worked when asked. Inside, the air smelled of pine and old coffee, the furniture sparse but clean. Jack set Rex near the stove, carefully checking the bandage again, his hands gentle in a way that contrasted with the hardness of his frame. Emily watched him then, really watched him, and understood something she had not allowed herself to name before. This man was dangerous only to those who chose to be, and that difference mattered. The sound came first, not from the forest, but from the road, a low engine, then another, tires crunching too deliberately over gravel. Jack froze, one hand still resting on Rex, his entire body shifting into readiness as if a switch had been flipped. "Stay behind me," he said to Emily, not harshly, but with a certainty that brooked no argument. She obeyed, though fear flickered in her chest, stepping closer to the dog rather than farther away. Through the front window, Jack saw two men step out of a dark pickup, both tall, both built heavy rather than lean, dressed in winter gear that looked expensive but worn hard. The first had a thick beard and a scar that cut through his left eyebrow, eyes small and calculating. The second was younger, clean-shaven, jaw square, movements impatient, the kind of man who relied on strength before thought. They did not look lost. Jack opened the door before they could knock, positioning himself so the frame narrowed the approach. "Road's closed," he said evenly, though it wasn't. The bearded man smiled without warmth. "We're not here for the road," he replied. His gaze flicked past Jack, landing on Rex, calculating quickly. "Nice dog. Expensive bloodline." The words landed heavy in the cold air. Emily felt her stomach drop, understanding immediately what Jack had already known, that Rex was valuable not because of who he was, but because of what he could become, and that value made him a target. Jack did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He shifted his weight subtly, injured leg protected, hands visible, posture relaxed in a way that signaled confidence rather than surrender. "You've got the wrong place," he said. The younger man scoffed, stepping forward, hand drifting toward his jacket. Emily moved then, not because it was sensible, but because instinct overrode caution, placing herself between Rex and the open doorway, arms out, shaking but firm. "He's hurt," she said, voice thin but unwavering. "You're not taking him." The bearded man laughed softly. "That's not your decision." The next moments unfolded fast, but not chaotically. Jack moved with precision born of years where hesitation meant death, redirecting the younger man's reach, using momentum rather than force, guiding him hard into the doorframe with a crack that stole his breath. The bearded man reacted slower than he should have, surprise flashing across his features before Jack closed the distance, controlling the space, forcing him back without striking, without escalating beyond what was necessary. It was over in seconds, the younger man on his knees gasping, the bearded one pinned and disarmed, eyes wide now with understanding rather than arrogance. Jack leaned close enough for them to hear him breathe. "Leave," he said quietly, "and don't come back." He did not need to say more. Men like that understood consequence when it was shown without theatrics. They left as they had come, tires spinning as they retreated down the road, and only when the sound faded did Jack's shoulders sag slightly, the effort catching up to him. Emily let out a breath she had not realized she was holding, legs trembling, heart hammering painfully. Rex whimpered once, then stilled as Emily knelt beside him, hands gentle, protective, shielding without thought. Jack watched her, something tightening in his chest. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. Emily looked up at him, eyes wet but clear. "Yes," she replied, "I did." Later, with the cabin quiet again and the stove crackling softly, Jack sat at the small table, hands wrapped around a mug he hadn't touched. "Rex was my partner's," he said finally, voice rough. "He died 8 months ago. The dog was all that came back." He stared at the steam rising, jaw tight. "I promised I'd keep him safe, leaving him in that storm." He shook his head once, hard. Emily listened without interruption, recognizing the weight of a promise broken by necessity rather than neglect. "I've been told my whole life that I wasn't worth protecting," she said softly. "Last night I found out I was wrong." She glanced at Rex, sleeping peacefully now, then back to Jack. "So were you." The truth of that settled between them, not as a grand revelation, but as a quiet correction. Something misaligned finally eased back into place. Rex slept on, breathing even, bandage clean, alive because two people who believed themselves expendable had chosen otherwise. Outside, the storm loosened its grip, clouds thinning, light returning in careful increments. For the first time in a long while, Jack did not feel the urge to keep moving, and Emily did not feel the need to disappear. What had begun in cold and fear settled into something steadier. Not safety, not yet, but the fragile beginnings of trust, earned the only way it ever truly was. Spring did not arrive all at once. It came in small permissions, the softening of snow along the cabin steps, the creek freeing its voice, the light lingering a few minutes longer each evening, as if the land itself were cautious about hope after a winter that had taken so much. Jack Turner kept the cabin the way he kept himself, spare, ordered, nothing unnecessary left lying around to be broken. Yet in the weeks after the storm, that discipline softened without dissolving. He mended the loose stair rail, fixed the window latch that rattled in wind, stacked firewood where Emily could reach it without straining. His leg healed slowly, the bruise fading from deep violet to a tired yellow, pain receding into a manageable ache that reminded him he was still here. He still woke before dawn, still checked the perimeter by habit, still scanned the tree line with eyes trained by years of consequence. But now, when he returned inside, there was coffee warming on the stove and the low sound of breathing that was not his alone. Emily learned the cabin's rhythms as if she had been listening for them all her life. She rose early, too, hair tied back in a simple knot, the borrowed jacket replaced by a thrifted one that fit her shoulders better. Her face looked less drawn in the morning light, color returning slowly to skin that had spent too long braced against cold. She moved quietly, respectfully, as someone used to being careful not to take up too much space, yet there was a steadiness to her steps now, a confidence that grew each day she was not asked to leave. She cleaned without being told, cooked with a practical hand, and spoke little about her past unless asked. When she did, her voice stayed even, as if the worst of it had already been carried long enough to lose its sharpest edges. Rex healed faster than either of them expected. The bandage came off, fur growing back in a darker shade along the shoulder where the wound had been. He was still young, all legs and curiosity, ears now standing with the confidence of a dog discovering the world would not always hurt him. He followed Jack everywhere at first, matching his pace, learning his moods. But he slept at Emily's feet at night, pressing close as if guarding a warmth he recognized. When he began to run again, tentative at first, then with joyous abandon, Jack watched with a quiet intensity that eased into something like relief. The promise he had nearly lost settled back into his bones, not as a weight, but as a guide. The town welcomed Emily cautiously, then fully. She found work at a small diner on Main Street, owned by a woman named Margaret Lewis, whose presence filled a room without demanding attention. Margaret was in her late 50s, broad-shouldered and strong, gray hair cut short, eyes sharp with kindness rather than curiosity. She asked Emily one question: "Can you work?" And when Emily nodded, Margaret handed her an apron and pointed to the coffee machine. The pay was modest, the hours steady, and the routine was a balm. Emily learned names, learned orders, learned how it felt to be expected. Jack came by some mornings, sitting in the corner with a mug he rarely finished, watching Emily move through the room with a competence that drew quiet respect. He spoke little to the regulars, his presence calm but unmistakable, the angles of his face softened by the absence of urgency. People noticed the dog first, Rex lying at his feet, alert but relaxed, then the man, and finally the way Emily's eyes lifted when Jack entered, a look that was neither dependent nor wary, but something balanced, chosen. As the snow retreated, Jack resumed his training regimen, not because he needed to prove anything, but because movement cleared his mind. He ran along the creek with Rex at his side, taught him basic commands with patience rather than force, corrected gently, praised often. He no longer flinched at the thought of the future. The ranch he had once planned for Rex remained an option, but it no longer felt urgent. Safety had found a different shape. One afternoon, as the first buds opened along the trees, Emily brought out the gray wool scarf and laid it across the porch rail. It was clean now, mended at one edge where the fabric had thinned, the fibers softened by careful washing. Jack watched her for a moment before understanding settled. He took a hammer and a single nail, fixed a small hook beside the door, and hung the scarf where the light could touch it. Not as a relic, not as a warning, but as a reminder of what warmth could do when given freely. Rex lay nearby in the sun, eyes half closed, tail flicking lazily, content in a way only animals who have survived know how to be. That evening, Emily stood at the stove, coffee steaming, the window open to the sound of water moving over stones. Jack leaned against the counter, arms folded, posture relaxed enough to surprise himself. He spoke then, not about the war or the loss or the promises that had nearly broken him, but about the creek's path, the way it curved after the bend, the trout that returned each year. Emily listened, smiling softly, adding sugar to the cups, understanding that this was how healing sounded when it finally trusted itself to speak. They did not name what they had become, not yet. There was no rush. Trust had been hard won and deserved time. What mattered was simpler. No one slept outside. No one faced the cold alone. No promise was given lightly, and none was broken without grief. The cabin held them gently as the season turned, and the land seemed to approve, offering green where there had been white, sound where there had been silence. When the sun dipped low and the porch filled with gold, Jack stepped outside, hand resting briefly on the scarf before letting it fall back into place. He looked out over the clearing, over Rex stretched in the warmth, over Emily moving easily in the kitchen behind him. The past did not disappear, but it loosened its grip, allowing room for what came next. Spring had arrived, not as a miracle, but as the natural consequence of choices made in the cold, when turning back had cost more than continuing forward. And for the first time in a long while, Jack Turner knew that no one here would be left behind. This story is not about heroes who never fall or miracles that appear out of nowhere. It is about ordinary moments when someone chooses not to turn away. A man keeps a promise even when it costs him everything. A woman offers warmth when she has none to spare. A small life survives because compassion arrived before despair finished its work. In the real world, change rarely comes as a grand event. It begins with one quiet decision made in the cold, when no one is watching. In everyday life, we are faced with smaller versions of the same choice. To stop when it would be easier to walk past. To help when we feel broken ourselves. To believe that our actions still matter, even when we think we are insignificant. You may never face a snowstorm or a battlefield, but you will face moments when kindness, loyalty, or courage is needed. And just like in this story, those moments can quietly change everything. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need to be reminded that goodness still exists. Leave a comment and tell us what this story meant to you, or if you've ever experienced a moment where a small act made a big difference. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories about resilience, loyalty, and the power of choosing compassion when it matters most.